You know, we don't often think about it, but can you actually own the shape of a bottle? Well, today we are diving into an absolutely fascinating Supreme Court case that's all about that very question. This isn't just about glass and gin. Oh no. It's a story about a corporate giant, a scrappy rival, and a legal showdown over who really controls the container. Let's get into it. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll set the stage with the battle of the bottles. Then we'll look at the challenger's pretty clever defense strategy and see how the Supreme Court completely dismantled it. After that, things get interesting with a company in disguise, which all leads us, of course, to the final verdict. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, the Battle of the Bottles. To really get what this is all about, you've got to meet the two main players. So on one side, you've got La Tondeña, the big guy, the established giant behind the legendary Ginebra San Miguel. And, crucially, they own the registered design for their bottle. On the other side, we've got Cagayan Valley Enterprises, an up-and-coming rival with their own product, Sonny Boy liquor. And what are they doing? They're reusing La Tondeña's bottles. You can kind of see where this is going, right? And here's the thing. The heart of this whole conflict is actually pretty simple. Cagayan wasn't out there making fake bottles. Nope. They were just going to junk dealers, buying up all the used authentic Ginebra San Miguel bottles they could find, and then refilling them with their own Sonny Boy liquor. Then they just slapped their own label on it. Super cost-effective, sure. But was it legal? Now, this didn't just happen overnight. La Tondeña had been playing the long game for decades. They legally registered their bottle design way back in 1953, and they even renewed it in 1974. So by the time 1981 rolled around and they filed a lawsuit, you can bet they felt they were on rock-solid legal ground. Okay, moving on to Section 2, Cagayan's clever defenses. Now, when you're facing a lawsuit from a huge company like that, you might just fold. But not Cagayan. They came to court ready to fight, with a whole bunch of legal arguments for why they were totally in the right. Which, of course, begs the question, how in the world do you defend using your direct competitor's legally protected bottles for your own product? Well, turns out, Cagayan's lawyers got pretty creative. They built their case around four main points. First, they said La Tondeña couldn't sue because they didn't actually print the word registered on the bottles themselves. Second, they argued that the law only protected containers for stuff like soft drinks, not hard liquor. Third, they pointed out that La Tondeña never asked for a deposit or put a note on their receipts saying they still own the bottles. And finally, their big defense was, hey, we're not fooling anyone, we're using our own totally different Sonny Boy labels. And this is where it gets really good. Section 3, the court's takedown. The Supreme Court took every single one of Cagayan's arguments and just systematically took them apart. First step, that whole "it's only for soft drinks" argument, yeah, the court was not impressed. They went straight to the wording of the law, pointing out that other lawful beverages means exactly what it sounds like. All beverages that aren't illegal. Gin is perfectly lawful. So, argument dismissed. Case closed on that one. You see, Cagayan tried to get fancy with this legal rule called e justem generis. They were basically saying, hey, the law mentions soda water, so other beverages must mean similar non-alcoholic stuff. But the court completely rejected that. They said you can't just use a niche interpretation rule to ignore the entire purpose of a law, which was clearly to protect all registered containers. And that's the key right there. The court was all about the intent of the law, not just clever wordplay. They ruled that the whole point of the act was to protect these containers, and limiting it to just soft drinks would make the law pretty useless. So what about the argument that some bottles didn't have the words "property of" on them? The court basically said, so what? It wasn't some fatal flaw. I mean, the names La Tondeña Inc. and Ginebra San Miguel were literally blown into the glass. It was pretty obvious who the owner was. Practical reality won out over a tiny technicality. This all came down to a legal idea called prima facie, which is just Latin for at first sight. The law creates a presumption. It says the minute a junk dealer or anyone else has these marked bottles without written permission, it's assumed to be illegal. The burden of proof was on Cagayan to show they had a right to use them, and they just couldn't do it. But hold on, because the case is about to take an even more dramatic turn. The court decided to dig into Cagayan's history, and what they found changed the whole game. This is where we get into a really cool legal concept called piercing the corporate veil. The court basically turned into a detective. They started connecting the dots. They unearthed a previous case against a company called Cagayan Valley Distillery. And who owned that? A guy named Diego Lim. And who's running the new company? His son, Regolio Lim. It's a family business, in the same industry, at the exact same location. The court's conclusion was brutal and undeniable. The new company was just a shell, an alter ego of the old one.
This was the absolute nail in the coffin. It meant Cagayan couldn't pretend they didn't know the law, because this family had been caught doing this exact same thing before.
So, with their defenses in shambles and their corporate identity exposed, all that was left was for the court to deliver the final verdict. First, the financial penalty. Cagayan was ordered to pay a total of 75,000 pesos. This was split into nominal damages, basically for violating La Tondeña's rights, exemplary damages, to make an example of them and warn others not to try it, and finally, attorney's fees. But honestly, the money was almost secondary. The real win for La Tondeña was this. The court made the temporary ban permanent. From that day on, Cagayan Valley Enterprises was legally and forever forbidden from using La Tondeña's registered bottles, period. Oh, and one more thing. For ignoring the court's temporary restraining order while the trial was going on, they got hit with an extra fine of 1,000 pesos for contempt of court. It was a clear message. You do not ignore a court order. So after all that, why should we care about this old case today? Well, because it established some huge principles that are still super important. It confirms that a unique container design can be protected property, just like a trademark or a logo. It makes it crystal clear that just slapping your own label on something doesn't make it yours. It shows that courts are willing to look past corporate games to stop injustice. And maybe, most importantly, it reminds us that a brand's identity is the whole package: the name, the logo, and the very bottle it comes in.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In today's world of fast commerce, social media unboxings, and a constant stream of new products, this case forces us to ask, how much is a container's identity really worth? What's the true value of that physical first impression? It's something to think about.